Welcome, my friends, to the Sage Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking, and I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my good friend Sofia Smallstorm returns to the show. Sophia will explain how our food supply, even organic food, is negatively impacted by farming techniques which include the use of fertilizers containing industrial waste, and how these processes affect our immune system. Sophia will then take us through a product she sells on her online avatar product storefront called Restore, which is designed to bring our immune system back to optimal levels of functioning. And so without further ado, here's the show with Sophia. So Sophia, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I've had a little bit of a delay because one of the problems I ran into was my hard drive had crashed, so I had to put things all back together again. This show is going to be a little different maybe from some of our other shows, and you have your store, Avatar Products, and your store many moons ago used to sell CDs, but then you began selling health-related types of products, and these are products that you have been personally involved in, and these are products that you use. And so today we're going to talk about a product that supports your gut health, where 70% of your immune system is located. It's located in your gut, and probably many of the people listening don't know that. But before we get into that, there was a newsletter that you did back in June of 2015. And this newsletter is a perfect setup for this discussion today. So I was wondering if you wanted to take us through that newsletter, and then we'll segue into gut health.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for having me again. And I just want to clarify, I wasn't selling CDs. People think of music if you say that. Oh. And I was selling DVDs. These were the good old 9/11 truth days, right? So I had 9/11 Mysteries, and I had other 9/11 DVDs, and then, of course, ancillary productions like on vaccines. Not that they're ancillary in that they don't count, but that they sort of ride alongside the truth-seeking quest. You know, if you want to wake up to 9/11, you're going to wake up to all kinds of things, chemtrails, vaccines, so forth. And so, yeah, I was a DVD store primarily. And then that market started to shrink when people got the HDMI cable. A lot more people were on fast, high-speed internet, and they could hook their laptops up to their TVs and lie back and watch high-definition anything they wanted on YouTube. So the DVD market, especially remember the piracy, burning, everybody bought DVD towers, and they burned thousands and thousands of copies of discs and handed them out right and left to educate people. And that has pretty much died down. And now people simply send links. They send each other YouTube videos, and they do the social media sharing rather than actually handing stuff out at work or in the street. So, yeah, I switched over into what I call bioremediation, and that's sort of my own word for it. It also, the end of the DVD market coincided with my hitting the age 50 mark. And I started to wake up with little stiffness in my knuckles and aches and pains and bit of fatigue. And I was turned on to iodine by somebody, and I started studying it. And I added iodine to my store because it really worked for me. And gosh, iodine sales sort of took me in the direction I was going to go. And then I added magnesium. The magnesium cream is my top seller, even more than iodine. And I'm not here to talk today about just my store. I mean, I do want people to visit it, avatarproducts.com, because there's nothing in it that doesn't work or that's bad. I have deliberately made a selection of things that I have found to be pretty extraordinary. And people derive a great amount of satisfaction from these products. And I say start cheap, buy a $10 tube of magnesium cream and see how well it works, and come back and see what else there is. So I just added this new product for gut health called Restore, and that is really the direction this show is going to go in. But in order to set it up, just as you said, I'm going to discuss the twin of chemical pesticides, which nobody knows about. I wrote in my newsletter that it's like another baby. It's the dark hidden twin to organic. Organic by itself, Mike, is kind of a mythology. People think, what is organic? You tell me, what does it mean?
Well, you're thinking that it's pure. You don't have any kind of artificial flavoring or pesticides and that type of stuff applied to the growing of the food or the producing of the food. So, I mean, that's my take on it. You filled me in a little bit before the show. I did not know about the part you're going to say next about fertilizer.
Okay, so organic means no chemical pesticides are used in growing these crops. That's how I understand it. And I frequented a farmer's market for many years. I actually had a booth there. And I now go to the same market, and I know the farmers. And I'll tell you something. One of the farmers, I would hear him say something very strange. People would ask him, "Are your strawberries organic?" Because we know that strawberries are sprayed. They're about the most heavily sprayed crop when it comes to pesticides, right?
Right.
And he would say, they're about 70% organic. And one day I walked over to him and I said, what do you mean when you say they're 70% organic? And he said, well, I use 70% natural fertilizer and about 30% commercial fertilizer. And that's when it hit me. This matches up with the book Fateful Harvest. So no one has heard of the other twin to chemical pesticides, which is chemical fertilizers that are laid on millions of acres of farmland over decades now. And this is what has created the green revolution. It made America's breadbasket happen. So someone recommended to me the book Fateful Harvest, and you can get it for a couple of bucks. It's one of those remaindered books. It was published by HarperCollins, a major publisher, in 2001. It is authored by a very, very skilled writer called Duff Wilson. He was a reporter at the Seattle Times. And the story kind of is based in Washington, starts out in the town of Quincy, Washington, and follows this farmer, Dennis DeYoung. So Dennis DeYoung was a very successful farmer in the early 80s, and he was riding high. He had a business plan. He thought he would do almost $600,000 in sales in 1985, and his net worth had reached $500,000. He had a 2-to-1 ratio of assets to liabilities, and yet everything went to hell. His pea harvest in 1985 was a tenth of what it should have been. The soil was hard and dry. His hay crop was a paltry 4 tons per acre, and he thought it was the weather. He was turning on a regular basis to the company nearby called Cenex Supply and Marketing, which provided him with farm goods, right? And one of these farm goods was bags of chemical fertilizer. Now, this was before environmental consciousness really took off. A lot of people in America were still kind of stuck in the 50s in their thinking. Remember how when they gave us canned foods and women were so pleased not to have to stand at a hot stove all day, they could open a can of beans and a can of whatever and put it on plates and it tasted good.
Right.
And people were even talking about how, well, one day we won't even have to eat whole, full meals, plates of foods. We can just throw a pill down our throat, right? This thinking, it just kind of prevailed in the minds of farmers. Science was going to improve crop growth. So this green revolution in America was really the result of man-made fertilizers. People in the past used manure. Some of the organic farmers at the market where I used to be used simply chicken manure and no chemical fertilizers whatsoever. But that didn't distinguish them from the other farmers because you could not say organic in that respect. You could only say organic if you didn't use chemical pesticides, right?
Right. And how far back was this, Sophia? Was this the 1980s?
Well, in the 80s, they were using chemical pesticides galore. Fertilizer, and they still do. And what had happened was, this is the rationale. So I will just read from my newsletter. As the story goes, before the 1980s, companies with toxic waste or surplus chemicals liked to pour it on vacant land. Why not? The land was just sitting there doing nothing. But as America became more environmentally conscious, states became more strict, mandating disposal or recycling. See, we got this word recycling. Recycling is actually a very tricky word. So this company that was in Quincy built themselves a cement-lined rinsate pond. The Senex pond, now I'm quoting the book, held 72,000 gallons. It filled up with brown liquid. What was put in the pond? That was unclear. Some fertilizers, some pesticides, some unmarked cans of chemicals. Senex didn't keep records of what went in the pond or what went out. The pond was tucked along the railroad track in a thicket of 10,000-gallon tanks used to store fumigants and liquid fertilizer. Some people thought Senex used the rinsate pond to mix a variety of leftover chemicals to sell as low-grade fertilizer. So people began to notice that the pond's depth would fluctuate. Some nights it would be almost full to the top, then the murky liquid would go down a couple of feet, and nobody knew why. Some people thought, oh, maybe it's evaporation, but it didn't evaporate that fast every day. They even put a pump in the pond, Senex, to spray the contents up in the air to speed evaporation, and it would spray, the fountain would spray shimmering wastewater 20 feet high into the sky. And the kids running at the track at the junior high school, they could smell the chemicals. So people, they didn't know what to do back then. Today, we'd be, in a big flap about something like this. But the pond remained kind of this unknown thing, this unidentified quantity, you could say.
Like a toxic soup.
Yeah, it kept filling up, and Senex didn't keep records about what was in it, and nobody really wanted to know what was in the pond, where did it go, and the answer was simply fertilizer. It doesn't go anywhere, nowhere. So Dennis Young, his land got so bad, it just didn't grow stuff anymore, and his bills got so high that he lost his land to Senex for non-payment of his bills. And what Senex decided to do to the land, because it was, I guess they forfeited his land.
So Senex basically took the land from him because he couldn't pay his bills.
Right.
Okay.
And rather than fight about why his land was so bad, he was suspecting then, as were other people, that it wasn't good to have this chemical company really close by. So what Senex did to that land was they planted Sudan grass on it. Now, Sudan grass is known as a good accumulator of heavy metals from the soil. It's a biological sponge. And I'm going to read you now from my newsletter. A local Appaloosa breeder, Appaloosas are horses, Ruth Ann Quay, had been looking for grass to mix with the alfalfa and oats she fed her prize horses as they transitioned from pasture to stall for the coming winter. There's some grass hay not very far from you that Senex has, she was told by a counter clerk at the Senex supply store. I don't think it's real expensive. Ruth Ann ordered 40 tons of the dried grass, which came at a great price, $1.50 per 70-pound bale. She started feeding a little bit of Senex's Sudan grass in November to wean the horses off the pasture. Then she mixed the grass with the rich alfalfa. The grass perfumed the air. She thought her Appaloosas would love it, and they did. They scarfed it right down. Some of her horses started losing weight, suffering from diarrhea. Ruth Ann thought it was colic or too much calcium from the alfalfa. Maybe it was parasites. But after she wormed the horses, they looked worse. She didn't suspect the Sudan grass hay. In fact, she fed them more to try to fatten them up. They just got sicker. Lesions developed on their long necks and broad shoulders. Sunshine was the first horse to get desperately sick. Ruth Ann put Sunshine on some bran and banamine, which is an anti-inflammatory that horses are given. She got a little better. Then she got a lot worse. One day the horse strained so hard to move her bowels, she ruptured and her intestines spilled on the barn floor. So she died, obviously.
Yeah.
And then other horses started to suffer like Sunshine. And she had to put a bullet into a couple of them. And she ended up losing so many of her horses. She didn't know what was wrong with them. She went to the vet. The vet had never dealt with reactions to toxic chemicals. He told her to call the state health department. Somebody there said, just call the EPA. And somebody at the EPA put her in touch with a toxicologist. And she described the weight loss, the diarrhea, the sores, the organ rupture. And the toxicologist said these are classic symptoms. But in order to find out what is going on in these horses, we need $1,000 a horse to check and do the tests. And Ruth Ann said, well, I've got 60 horses out there. There's no way I've got $60,000 to find out what's in those horses. So my contraction of this principle is pollution, dilution, solution. So there were inspectors that were contacted by Dennis DeYoung, the farmer. The mayor of the town, Patty Martin, was very, very active in this issue. And Ruth Ann. This one inspector said he found out that the State Department of Agriculture had licensed industrial waste as fertilizer. This is what brought in the Seattle Times writer, Duff Wilson. He got word of this, and he went to Quincy and started digging. Now, what's interesting here is that there is no federal regulation on what went into fertilizer, and possibly not now either. This is back in the 80s, remember. I think this book was actually written in the 90s and then released in 2001, because you have to do a lot of research for something like this. So I'm going to quote from the book. There was a limit on the amount of lead in paint, but not in fertilizer. There was a limit on the amount of dioxin in cement, but not in fertilizer. There was a limit on arsenic in industrial slag, but not in fertilizer. The California Heavy Metal Task Force notes showed that manufacturers asking state officials to declare the polluted skimmings from metal smelters to be exempt from standards for hazardous wastes if they were put in fertilizer. So that's what they agreed. They would use this loophole, and they would call industrial waste, Mike. They would call it a product.
Yeah, I mean, this is amazing to me, Sophia. What are these officials, these state officials, morons? Something is declared as toxic, as a poison, and then let's just put it in fertilizer and everything will be okay. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It's unreal to us, Mike, but I think people were much more unsuspecting even a couple of decades ago. The average public, they really didn't have a consciousness about anything like this, and people in the industries were just shaking each other's hands, making deals, and patting each other on the back. Now, I'll read a little more if you don't mind. This is from the book. Fly ash is a waste collected from filters, scrubbers, and other pollution control equipment in coal-fired power plants. Now, you know that there is a theory out there that our coal-fired power plants are contributing vast quantities of steam to the composition of chemtrails, okay? So Midwest and East Coast industries were cleaning up their smokestack residues only to lay the waste on agriculture. Pennsylvania industry alone recycled 4 million tons of coal ash and 2.1 million tons of a similar material called flue dust from smokestacks every year. Rail cars packed with fly ash rumbled to the west. They dumped it on California farms, saving the $65 per ton cost of burying it in a landfill. California growers bought the chalky gray material under names like Lime Plus. They spread it on their fruit crops and lawns and gardens. Liming improved biological activity, nitrogen fixation, and phosphorus availability in the soil. Heavily farmed California needed a lot of lime, but fly ash was not natural limestone and posed more risk to people. The ash contained mercury, molybdenum, selenium, and dioxins, and none of the toxins were disclosed to customers.
Wow. It's just like I said before, I'm still going to say, it's just amazing to me that, I don't know. I know what you're saying, that back then people weren't as aware and on top of things from an environmental perspective, but still, Sophia, I mean, we're talking about coal ash and stuff like that and using it as a product called Lime Plus. Absolutely amazing.
This is my summary that's in my newsletter after the quote from the book. Chemical companies on the selling end were calling it bulk soil amendments and laughing all the way to the bank. They obtained the waste for cheap or even free and packaged it to sell to farmers. One feature of heavy metals is that they stay in the topsoil where plants grow. Agriculture is being used by some industries as a dumping ground for their hazardous waste, lead, cadmium, other heavy metals. Some of these byproducts are flue dust and baghouse dusts from zinc smelters, copper recycling plants, steel mills. Another major source is spent acids from the galvanizing industries. It's called recycling, Mike. Micronutrients. Soil naturally contains trace amounts of zinc, iron, manganese, copper, boron, and dozens of other earth elements that biological organisms use in trace amounts. So then someone had a brainwave, just take toxic industrial waste, skip the huge disposal fees, spread it out all over the land because it's all there anyway. These are all elements in the periodic table. You can look them up. But the parts per million that they exist in naturally in the land is far less than the concentrations that they end up in when they're sold to farmers and farmers sprinkle it on crops as fertilizer. So ironically, when it goes into the silo, it's called hazardous waste. When it comes out of the silo, it is now not regulated and it's the exact same material and it's going to be called by the EPA a product.
And recycled, which is a word that, everybody conjures up as being good.
Right. Now, the book talks about a guy in Tacoma called Richard Camp. He was in the galvanizing business in World War II. He was rust-proofing chains and anchors for the Navy. And these steel parts would be dipped in a vat of molten zinc, and then there would be impurities that formed in the vat from oxidation, and those would be skimmed and dumped in barrels out in the back of his shop yard. And so over the years, there were more and more barrels accumulating in the shop yard of this really gross crud. There were barrels of these toxic things, toxic material accumulating in the shop yard. And the government contracts ended because World War II was over. And so Camp didn't know what to do. He needed work. So one day he learned of this white powder, zinc sulfate, and that it was a fertilizer for apple trees. And that he started to get a brainwave. So from the book, Camp realized he had some wasted stuff sitting around in barrels that he could use as a raw material to make some money. He sold an alternative to the white powder of virgin zinc. He started selling the processed waste from his barrels to apple growers. When his barrels were empty, he bought zinc skimmings from the galvanizing companies around him in the Seattle area. He developed a dry zinc product to mix with regular fertilizer for row crops. He educated the farms on zinc deficiencies. They started asking their fertilizer blenders for more zinc, and there weren't enough zinc skimmings around the Pacific Northwest to fill the demand. So then he comes across a new form of zinc. All right?
Yep.
Electric arc furnaces reclaim steel from recycled cars. Today in the United States, now this is going back to 2001 when the book was released, 60% of junk cars are recycled in electric arc furnaces. The steel industry takes 45 million tons of ferrous scrap off American landscape each year. Every time the steel is melted to purify its main ingredient, iron, the contaminants are concentrated in a toxic waste. I'm reading from the book. The zinc, cadmium, chromium, arsenic, lead, and dioxins go to fume at a lower temperature than iron. Up the chimney they rise. To prevent air pollution, the dust is cooled and collected in a structure called a bag house. The dust is typically 10 to 20% zinc from galvanized parts of the car, like the door handles. It's about 3% lead, 0.5% cadmium, and sky-high in dioxins from incinerated plastic. In the end, about 1.5% of the weight of the recycled steel ends up in the bag house. The 45 million tons of scrap metal leave 650,000 tons of hazardous waste a year. And so here's the loophole. I call this heading fertilizing the language. The loophole that lets toxic waste become fertilizer is this. Under state and federal law, wastes that can be utilized as effective substitutes for commercial chemical products do not have to be treated or handled as hazardous wastes. And a quote from the book, environmental agencies were promoting toxic waste recycling and fertilizer companies were helping to spread it around and mix it in. They were not checking for toxic chemicals. They could not know what was safe. There was almost no scientific research on the subject. There was no way for buyers to know what they were really getting. So illness like cancer began to develop in rural areas, and people in clusters were being affected. Many were farmers, and this was called idiopathic cancer, meaning strange. So that's how it's remained. We hear about chemical pesticides and you go organic to keep your body clean. But for all these decades, we have been sold produce grown in soil that is laced with deadly materials from dirty industries.
Yeah, a little disheartening, Sophia.
So what ends up happening, Mike, as I am beginning to understand now, is that when you litter and pepper and scatter all this toxin on the soil because you've rationalized that it starts out in the soil, so what's the harm of putting it back?
Yeah.
Let's just add it back into the soil. You're actually causing insult to the plants. And when biology is insulted, is injured, it goes, hey, and it just booms, does a growth spurt. That's just a natural, you could call it a natural biological reflex. The body puts all of its energy into repairing tissues. Plants put all of their energy into springing back. But what you end up doing is you pretty much kill the bacteria in the soil. It's called the soil biome. You ruin the topsoil, and this book notes that it takes, I think, about 500 to 1,000 years to make 1 inch of topsoil from weathered rock and the decay of plants and animals. Remember I did the biological darkness show and we talked about the decomposers, the detritivores. The bacteria that live in the soil are the creatures that we are transporting into our bodies by way of the plants. So we can't eat the soil. We need that biome in our bodies, and it ends up inhabiting us. We are the hosts for those, they're sometimes called parasites, the gut bacteria, the gut flora, and the body bacteria that act as the trash men when we have too much cellular injury. So when you kill the biome in the soil, you end up injuring the plants. And when you have weak plants and weak crops, what does that bring? It brings more detritivores, more decomposers. It brings you pests. So the chemical fertilizer industry that boomed after World War II, and with the growth of industry in the 70s and 80s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, that brought pests to the crops. And now we had another source of revenue for the chemical companies, which was chemical pesticides.
Yep, so it's a wicked cycle, a very wicked cycle. And the book, Sophia, just so in case the audience wants to read it, is Fateful Harvest. Is that the name of the book?
Fateful Harvest from 2001. You can go on Amazon and get it used. You can go and look anywhere for it. I mean, there's plenty of copies remainder. In fact, it's said that HarperCollins conveniently remaindered this book when 9/11 happened, took all the attention and focus off it, and pretty much stuck it in the trash.
I'm going to have to pick the book up, and the author is Duff Wilson. Well, now you're explaining to us that we're in a cycle of, well, now we have to get rid of these pests.
Yes, we're going to be talking about the gut biome. I stumbled across some interviews with a Dr. Zachary Bush, and I was extremely impressed. I have tried now to learn as much as I can about what Dr. Bush discovered, and I'm going to go through it here as I understand it, which isn't a perfect understanding by any means, because I am not a scientist, but I have grappled with this material. I have talked to the staff at Dr. Bush's company. I'm carrying the product. I'm using the product because I'm extremely interested in this discovery. And I will explain. So yes, the boom of chemical fertilizers brought the need for chemical pesticides. And of course, the most prevalent pesticide used is Roundup, glyphosate, right?
Right.
And just very interestingly and coincidentally, glyphosate began as a descaling agent in factory chimneys, and it was also used as a chemotherapy treatment. So what Dr. Bush describes, I'm going to go back to the body. It's very interesting, Mike. We are very complex organisms, and we produce different kinds of energy for different kinds of tasks. And we eat food for this energy. That's part of the energy source. Grounding, free electron transfer is another part. But anyway, we'll stick to the food. We can't do a damn thing with the food on our plate. It looks good. It smells good. We like to chew it. swallow it, very satisfying, but we can't do anything with it. We cannot liberate the fuel or the energy from our own food.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. When you say we can't do anything with it, what exactly does that mean? Does it mean the food is not really doing what it's supposed to be doing as far as being energy for our body?
We need some little helpers to process the foods. We are the hosts to trillions of bacteria. And living in our gut are what we call gut flora, the gut bacteria, right?
Right.
So our gut biome kind of mimics the soil biome because we are transporting from the things we eat the bacteria in the soil into our bodies. And with a diminution of the soil biome, as we've just described, the consequence of having all these noxious toxic chemicals put on the soil and on the crops, we ourselves now have a very diminished gut biome. It's called, by Dr. Bush, monogut. So our bodies are needing 20 to 30,000 different species of gut bacteria. But today, Mike, it takes 44 people together to come up with a range 10 million species. 44 people required to find 10 million species of gut bacteria, when each of us should have 20 to 30 million alone. So we're very deficient in gut biome. The foods we eat today are not grown in rich soils anymore. We don't have rich soils. And we have a very narrow complement of bacteria in the soil, and therefore a very narrow complement of bacteria in our own digestive tracts. Now, I'll explain what I learned from Dr. Bush. Our gut biome is held in by what's called a gut wall or gut membrane. And that gut wall is one cell layer thick, and it starts in your sinus cavities, in your head, and it extends all the way down to your rectum. Now, the gut wall, the gut membrane, is a firewall. It's a very important structure, and the cells in it have spaces in between, which are called tight junctions. The tight junctions are intelligent. They know when to flex open to let in enzymes from the bloodstream and to not let out unprocessed or unfully processed proteins, oils, other things that you've eaten, because the bacteria in your gut have to be working on those. The bacteria liberate the fats and sugars from the food you eat. You can't do that by yourself. You have to have trillions of bacteria living in you in the form of 20 or 30,000 different variants to liberate the energy from your food. Now, waiting on the other side of the gut wall, the gut membrane, is what Bush terms 70% of your immune system. In essence, it's a bunch of blood vessels. They're all hugging the other side, going, gimme those nutrients. I have to run with them all over the body. It is your white blood cells that make your antibodies. And those white blood cells are what we call the Th2 immune system. The gut itself is part of the Th1 immune system, as is your skin, your eyes, other gateways, portals, and barriers on coating and clothing your body. So Th2 immunity is the production of antibodies, and that is lying outside the gut. And when entire protein molecules and oil molecules, complex molecules that haven't been disassembled, proteins need to be disassembled into amino acids, and oils need to be disassembled into lipids, different fats. And when they're in entire complex molecular form, they cause the waiting Th2 immune system to go nuts. It says, what? Why are these whole big, huge, chunky molecules coming at me? I have to produce antibodies. This shouldn't have happened. The Th1 system should have taken care of this. So proteins and oils need to be addressed in the gut, not outside of it. And it's when these materials leak out of failing tight junctions in that gut membrane that they start causing autoimmune disease and other failures in the body. So I'll pause there in case you want to ask any question.
And this might be a dumb question, so just bear with me. Is this also referred to, or is this associated with leaky gut?
It is that. It is leaky gut. In fact,
Okay.
Dr. Bush says that there's no such thing as disease. There's only failure of health, and it all begins in that gut wall. It all begins with those tight junctions that open up when they shouldn't. They should know when to close, know when to open. And they don't do that anymore because our toxic load is so distressing that it is messing up the body's intelligence. And we don't have enough bacteria in our bodies to govern that intelligence. So I'll explain a little more now. So the more complex the organism is on this earth, the more it has to incorporate other organisms to do jobs for it. Think of a human being like a big, I hate to say it, but a big corporation. A corporation is nothing without everybody who works for it, right?
Right.
So in order to do what we do, which is complicated, we think, we plan, we build, we destroy, we do all kinds of things, creative things. We have to have energy in the form of food. And the energy is liberated by organisms that we have integrated and incorporated into us. We host trillions of bacteria, and they disassemble our food for us. And then our blood supply ships the disassembled components to our cells, which still can't do anything with that. The cells can't do anything with fats and sugars. They have to wait for the mitochondria, which are these separate little organs inside each cell that date back to ancient bacteria. They are not, okay, we are eukaryotes. That's the life kingdom that we come from. But inside us are two different kinds of prokaryotes. That's another life kingdom. Our bacteria that we have to have in us are prokaryotic, and the mitochondria are prokaryotic. They're non-human. So our energy liberation has to be done by non-human critters that live inside us. And it's the mitochondria in our cells that process the fats and sugars that the bacteria have enabled us to have. And those fats and sugars provide electrons that make the fuel of the cell called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So the crux of the lesson here is that we need two other forms of life, the prokaryotes, two other types of another life form in our bodies. We have incorporated, as we have complexified over the eons, we have incorporated another life form into our bodies, and those life forms are critical to our survival. Now, what Bush discovered was this. I'm going to tell you something about him. He was actually an NIH-funded, allopathically trained, dyed-in-the-wool MD researcher, cancer researcher. He was at University of Virginia formulating chemotherapy products.
So mainstream medicine.
Very mainstream. And his funding ended, and he didn't know what to do. And he decided, well, I'll just go back to being a doctor. And he went to rural Virginia, to one of the most, you could say, poor and rundown parts of America, where the people were, there was no food store, there was no grocery store there, Mike. People were eating from gas stations. And the people were typically very obese, diabetic, they had cancer, they had all kinds of failing health conditions. And he opened a clinic and he started to treat them. And, you know, the first thing he did was recommend that they not eat the wrong foods. And they said, no, his diabetic patients told him, we're fully compliant with the foods we're supposed to be eating on the list of approved foods for diabetes. And he said, well, what do you eat? And they said, we eat hot dogs. And he said, well, what do you mean? And they said, we're 100% compliant. We eat hot dogs for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And it's on the approved list. And they're getting the hot dogs from the gas stations or someplace, convenience food, right?
Yeah.
So he started to feed them vegetables, organic vegetables, kale, and they still didn't get better. Some did, but some actually got worse. And he could not understand this. And that was what led him to discover that the whole gut biome and bacterial complement necessity in human food processing. And he decided that, well, if they're not getting better on eating plants and vegetables, and even organic ones at that, there's got to be something wrong with the plants and vegetables. And that's what led him to the soil. And he discovered a very depleted biome in the soil, which has consequentially caused a depleted biome in human beings.
So he had to know something about what the biome should have been in that produce or those plants. He had to know what it is that he was looking for that he found to be deficient. Yes?
He knew, as anyone who starts doing research, he had to start re-educating himself, I'm assuming. I've never spoken to him, and maybe one day I'll be lucky enough to interview him, but right now he's sought after by people with other degrees, and he's busy, and I'm not on the list. So anyway, what he discovered one day by fluke was a white paper on soil biome, and it had a diagram on it. And he looked at this diagram and he thought, wow, it showed a carbon molecule in the soil that had a binding site on it that matched up with something he had seen before. And from what I understand, in his formulation of chemotherapy molecules go after mitochondria because our cells need to be told when to die. A cancer cell is a psycho cell that is replicating, subdividing ad infinitum, and it's a tumor. That's a tumor. It's called an infinite cell line. A cell line that doesn't know when it's too old and when it has to retire. And that signal, called apoptosis, is delivered to the cell from within itself, I think. It's sort of like a self-intelligent, self-delivered signal. But cancer cells don't receive the signal. They don't hear apoptosis, and they don't ever die. So what Bush discovered was this binding site on this carbon molecule looked a lot like the ones on chemotherapy molecules, which went for the mitochondria and got the cancer cell to die. This is very complex biochemistry in cancer that I don't know much about. But because the carbon molecule binding site matched that of the mitochondria, he figured something out. He figured out that bacteria make a metabolite. This is a byproduct of their own metabolism. And these carbon metabolites are what speak to our mitochondria. They have matching interfaces. Those are important in what's called redox signaling. Redox is the energy mechanism, energy making process of the cell. So to make it understandable, the bacteria in us produce their own carbon byproducts. And the more bacteria we have, the more varied those carbon molecules are. They're all different. Zach Bush calls them carbon snowflakes because the range of bacteria, if you have 20,000 different species, you're going to get 20,000 different kinds of carbon molecules, right? They're all going to be different. And some studies from UCSD and UCLA were yielding at the time that very interesting facts, discoveries that didn't seem to have a place in the field of research. They didn't fit in any puzzle. The puzzle piece didn't fit in a place yet. So those research studies said, if you lack such and such bacteria, you tend to develop breast cancer. If you lack another kind of bacteria, you will develop prostate cancer. And what Bush figured out was this has to do with that carbon molecule. The bacteria make a carbon molecule. You could call it a residual molecule. And that carbon molecule speaks to the mitochondria of the breast cells. And other carbon molecules speak to the mitochondria of the prostate cells. So this must be true all over the body, that we need the 20 or 30,000 different species because each metabolite, snowflake carbon molecule that kind of bacteria makes in its own metabolic process speaks a special intelligent language to the different kinds of cells in our body, controlling how they live or die. And this was the start of his product Restore. So what he did was he went to the American Southwest, to the desert, where the earth has been compressed for a very long time. I'll just call it eons because everybody will start arguing with me about how old the earth is, and I can't use the word millions or billions or any kind of number of years.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So eons. So if you go excavate topsoil today, we only have, if we're lucky, 2 feet of topsoil on the earth right now. At one time, Bush tells us the earth had 200 feet of topsoil. And remember what I said from my newsletter from the Duff Wilson book, if it's correct. I mean, I can't vouch for any of this, but nature takes 500 to 1,000 years to make an inch of topsoil from weathered rock and decay of plants and animals. So it's the bacteria that are decomposing the plants and animals that mixed with minerals makes that rich topsoil. So in the American Southwest, in desertified earth, he found carbon molecules from bacteria from ages ago. The bacteria are long gone, but their metabolites are still in the soil. So what you're getting are the range of carbon molecules that came from so long ago. And it's that range you need, because it's the carbon molecule that signals and speaks the intelligent language to the mitochondria in your body. So he created, with some very smart formulators, other doctors, and a chemist called William Vitalis, the reactivation of these carbon metabolites from this ancient and very pristine soil. And that is the product Restore. And when you take Restore, it starts to get that gut membrane back into the proper flexing action, the intelligent flexing. And I've skipped the glyphosate chapter here, but I will get into that in a minute. I'm going to let you ask anything you want to.
So the question I have, Sophia, and again, bear with me because I'm learning here, the product Restore is focused on carbon then. And so what's the difference between Restore and products that are called probiotic or prebiotic? Because we hear a lot about that. Take probiotics in order to help your gut health. So what's the difference there? Do you know?
I know what I know from Dr. Bush, let's just say. A probiotic, there's a huge probiotic market now. It's like $30 billion, and everybody is talking about them and taking them. Probiotics introduce more bacterial variants or strains into your gut. However, they are not from human beings. They are taken from cow intestines. So do they really help us? Initially, because you're introducing a new population with new strains, people find them to be helpful. But Bush says he never has his patients use probiotics for more than 2 weeks. They can stimulate something in you, but ultimately you are now inviting copies of strains that really don't fit with the human body. So probiotics also are narrow in their selection. Many probiotics will consist of 5 to 7 different strains of bacteria, but millions and millions and millions of copies of those strains. I had ordered a probiotic, which I was taking, and I've now quit since I learned this. It had 16 different strains, and it was considered a super duper probiotic. So yeah, that's what these probiotics are going to do. They're going to fill your intestines with bacteria that befit cows.
Okay, and so the product Restore does not have that at all.
Right. Now, here's what's very confusing, and I thought this in the beginning. I thought that somehow Restore got out of ancient soils the bacterial complement and put it in your gut, but it doesn't. As I said, the bacteria are gone. They don't live forever, and that soil is very dry. You couldn't farm on it. It's just not been farmed for eons. It is the leftover of topsoil. But what's in it are the carbon leftovers, the carbon molecules that ancient bacteria made eons ago. And the range of molecules, as I understand it, is there. You need a range that broad in your gut. because it's the carbon molecules that have the binding sites that match up with that of your mitochondria and speak that intelligent redox signaling language to your to your mitochondria. So carbon redox molecules bring information to cells to tell them what is a healthy cell and what cell needs to die. It does a lot, iodine promotes apoptosis in cells. So do these carbon redox molecules. Now, when Dr. Bush put Restore onto breast cancer cells, they started to die in 2 hours. And that's a healthy death. That's not a chemo death. That's not a death from toxins. That's a death from an organic process.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay.
Now, I will talk about glyphosate. Glyphosate and gluten intolerance, as I understand it, are when that gut wall, those tight junctions, those spaces between the cells in the membrane. Now, let's do a picture because I had this all messed up. Inside your intestines are huge quantities of bacteria. And we should have 20 to 30,000 different kinds, but we don't. We have a monogut.
Well, what's interesting to me, Sophia, is that, and I'm just talking from a layman's perspective, and probably a lot of other people think the same way, is that having thousands upon thousands of bacteria in you is not a good thing. But I'm listening to you and I'm coming to the conclusion that I'm wrong, that we should have this bacteria in us, yes?
Now, why do you think it's not a good thing?
Well, because, we think in terms of antibacterial, right? So wash your hands. You don't want bacteria on your hands. Otherwise, you're going to have germs. We hear that all the time.
This is what I covered in the Biological Darkness show. It's the battle between the germ theory of disease and the bioterrain theory, which is never, ever mentioned. So, yeah, we've been taught to fear germs, and we don't understand that we're crawling with them. I mean, take a microscope to your armpit, to your fingernails, underneath your fingernails, your hair, your beard, your mouth is crowded with any number of millions of oral bacteria. And these bacteria are our buddies. As I said, when we complexified, we had to integrate other life forms to help us move on. Why do you think Exxon is such a big, successful corporation? All these corporations require all the little worker bees. They require all the people that put them together. And we're like a big, giant corporation, I'm sorry to say. The bacteria that live in our gut are the things that process our food. We can't do it. We need all the worker bees in us doing it. So that's the relationship. We have a symbiotic relationship with bacteria. And endosymbionts are organisms that live inside us that we require for our functionality and our survival.
So in other words, the bacteria really, you use the analogy of a corporation. Our bodies are only as good as the sum of the parts then, right? So when we don't have what we need in our body, then the body as a whole suffers.
That's right. We can't live without bacteria. And we've got them, but we just don't have enough to be disease-free. Disease is a failing of different cell systems and tissues, because if Bush's theory is correct, and I'm going to quote what I learned from him. I'm not going to quote, I'm going to paraphrase. That the variants of carbon signaling molecules made by these bacteria that live in our bodies speak to the range of tissues in our bodies and actually control their health. So he mentions microRNA, and I'm not going to go into what that is. It's too complicated for a show like this, and I barely understand it. But microRNA turns our genes on and off at the DNA level. Now, 15% of the microRNA in your bloodstream is from your gut bacteria, which translates to this, that the bacterial genome turns human genes on and off. This is the symbiosis. This is the endosymbiosis. We need these creatures to regulate our bodies.
Again, like I said, this is going to take for some people to get a little reoriented because of the way bacteria is presented or portrayed in our society. You always want to have antibacterial types of stuff, as I mentioned before. You don't want germs and so on. So this is very, very interesting. I mean, this is another area where you're bringing something to the table. You're bringing a topic to the table, Sophia, where it's very thought-provoking, very, very thought-provoking, and it should get people to take a step back and take a look at this. Because especially, folks, I'm talking to the audience now, because there's a lot of people that are walking around saying they have stomach issues, digestive issues, leaky gut, gluten intolerance, and all of this. And I know I have people in my family that are suffering from these things, Sophia. And in fact, I'm going to be purchasing the Restore for some of the folks in my family to see if this is going to get them healthy again. So, I mean, it's really a paradigm shift in my view, to a great extent. Maybe not for you, because I know you look at this stuff all the time and you're always digging into this. But for other folks, it's going to be, have to change their mindset a little bit.
Right. Mike, when I'm going to get into the glyphosate finally. So Monsanto has made this glyphosate product part of the agricultural protocols. They tell you it's safe, but it's not, because the second you intake glyphosate, and it doesn't mean that you have to go and have a pizza down the road at the pizza parlor. It means you can walk outside and get glyphosate in your body. You can be as organic as possible, and you will still be having glyphosate in your body because it's in the rainfall, it's in the air, and it simply blows around. So we are glyphosate corrupted and glyphosate contaminated. And glyphosate opens those tight junctions up, and the cells the gut membrane cells allow all this incomplete, unprocessed stuff to spill out, including the bacteria. So we have toxins in our bloodstreams because of a failing gut wall, because the gut membrane is no longer intelligent, because it fails. When you eat gluten, same thing happens. Gluten causes us to produce something called zonulin. That also controls the tight junctions and opens them up. And with Restore is the carbon molecules in Restore work so well that Bush reports that when you take Restore before a meal, it actually keeps those tight junctions closed and doesn't allow them to open. So it works against glyphosate. And in gluten intolerant people, he says, after just a few days of taking Restore, you can eat gluten again. And you can eat, some people who are really badly gluten sensitive, they can eat gluten after a month.
Wow.
So that's pretty amazing. So, you can ask me, someone did the other day, well, why would people eat gluten? Why would they eat carbs? I'm going to tell you what I think of the ketogenic diet, the low carb diet. And people could, take me to task, but
it's your opinion.
This is what I learned. When I worked at a major sports magazine, I was a health editor, and my job was to read abstracts, medical abstracts. I mean, we had a very good science, I'll just call it library. We had subscriptions to not just JAMA and the Lancet and New England Journal of Medicine, but all kinds of medical publications. And I read them. That was what I had to do. And I learned some very interesting things that have stayed with me since then. And I also interviewed scientists and doctors and exercise physiologists. I wrote a column, which soon became the most popular column in the magazine. It was very nice for me. And that's what has led to this interest, I have to say. What the work I'm doing now with you. This is the favorite topic I have, talking about biology and the body and learning about it in these new ways. But back then, I learned that the body has 3 fuel sources. It has fat to burn, and I'm talking about work in terms of muscular output. Fat, glycogen, which is based on carbohydrates, it's sugars stored in the muscle cells, and adenosine triphosphate. So for your basic activity, the fuel of the cell is adenosine triphosphate. But when output has to be somewhat energetic, we have a term called maximum oxygen uptake. It's called VO2 max. let's say you were just taking a slow walk. You're burning fat and you have enormous amount of fat in your body. It's visible even. So your fat reserves could be infinite in a sense. You could be 500 pounds and you'd have a lot of fat to burn. But when you have to step it up and you have to break into a jog, now you can't burn fat anymore because fat isn't very efficient when it comes to actual physical output. You have to go to another fuel system. Your muscle cells have to burn glycogen, and that comes from carbohydrates. And you have about a 3-hour supply of that. And you can play tennis or basketball or run for 2 or 3 hours. And after that, you're going to be pooped. You're going to run out of sugars, glycogen to burn, and you're going to have to revert to fats, which doesn't work. You can't run a marathon on fats. This is why it's so hard to do those last miles of a marathon, because you've run out of your carbs, your sugars, and you're going back to fat, and fat is good for walking, not running. So when you exert yourself over like 50-55% of VO2 max, that's your oxygen output, and you go up to 80, 85, 90%, you're using glycogen, and you have a 3-hour supply. When you break 80, 85, 90% of output effort, you are going to be needing ATP. This is sprinting, 100-yard dash. This is lifting weights, pumping iron. You only have a 3-minute supply. So you have to rest after 3 minutes and you have to make more ATP if you want to run another 100 yards at the fast as you can. So this is what makes the mile such a hard race, because the people who run the mile to break the world record, they are running on ATP, which is basically a 3-minute supply. So that last leg of the mile, the last lap around the track, you're doing on glycogen. You can't do your 100% output on sugar. You have to do it on ATP, and you've run out of ATP. So this is where the mental component comes in. Actually, in the case of, we talked about rhabdomyolysis, when your muscles run out of energy, they will actually cannibalize themselves. They will ship their proteins to the liver. The liver will convert the proteins into sugars. It'll be shipped right back to the muscle cells, and they'll have a little more energy to finish that last lap of the mile with. So if you eat a diet that has no carbs in it or a few carbs in it, you're not going to have that storehouse of 3 hours of glycogen to burn when you exert yourself a little more. So you start feeling tired. And it's going to, Dr. Mercola and others say you have to train yourself to burn fat. Well, if you're swimming laps in a pool as I do, or you're running 3 or 4 miles, or you're, doing aerobics or spin bike or whatever, it's very hard to get your fat stores to give you that kind of output, because typically carbohydrates broken down into glycogen give you that output, not fat. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. It's interesting because I know a lot of folks that they stay away from carbs. And when they do, they will lose weight. I will say that, the people that I know that are on a carb-free diet, but on the other hand, they do seem to be tired a lot.
Yeah, your body needs a little reservoir of energy in case you have to dash up the stairs, in case you have to rush across the street, in case you have to run to answer the phone. There are things we do every day that require more energy than fat is good for. Fat is good for dusting, vacuuming, sitting at the computer, talking on the phone, but it is not good for running around. And you need that little bit of carbs, that 3-hour supply, so that you can get around a little quicker. We were asking the question, why would anyone want to eat gluten? Well, hell, this is a great source of that glycogen. Humanity has eaten grains for a long time. As humanity started to put out a little more, the carbohydrates were good. In fact, the potato rescued Europe from famine because the starch in it gave a very steady output of calories. Complex carbohydrates give you a good, steady source of energy. It's when you eat too many, it's when you're deficient in minerals that your body's, sensors are just over-triggered. For instance, let me tell you something, we don't have sensors in the brain to control how much fat we eat and how much sugar we eat. Why do you think that is? It's because in the wild, it's very hard to find fat and sugar. So there's no turnoff for it. If you find a berry patch, your body says, eat every berry you can pick. If you find nuts or something like that, eat them all. So people, the Pirahas, for instance, they don't eat salads. They laughed. I did a show with you on this. They laughed at Daniel Everett because he asked someone to bring him some salad greens on a boat. And they said, why are you eating leaves? Well, the Piraha eat fish fresh from the river. If someone brings in fish at 3:00 in the morning, they'll all wake up and they'll eat it. They are transferring the biome from the fish. They can be protein eaters or they can be plant eaters, krill eaters. I mean, we don't know what they eat, but the fish are transferring the biome into the Pirahas, and they need it to be as fresh as possible. I mean, either we eat the plants ourselves or we eat creatures that eat the plants. But the fresh kill has always been preferred. But in the days of refrigeration, we eat this packaged frozen protein. But all that we're really eating protein animals for is to transfer their biome into our bodies, basically.
Yeah, this is very, very interesting, Sophia. I think I derailed you a little bit here with some of my questions, but going back, did you want to say any more about glyphosate? I think that's where I probably took a left turn on you.
Yeah, glyphosate apparently is the most prevalent toxin on the planet. It's floating around everywhere, and it's causing everybody to have leaky gut. And as Bush says, the origin of health failure is in the gut. He said something very striking. I don't quite understand it, but he said, asthma is not a disease of the lungs. It's a disease of the gut expressed by the lungs.
Wow.
Now, when children are born vaginally, they leave the protection of the uterus and they pass through their mother's, basically through her body out into the open world. And in that passage, they pick up her body biome. And when babies are delivered by cesarean method, they are born sterile, Dr. Bush says. They're just lifted out of an incision and they're plopped down next to their mother in the hospital and they don't get any biome at all.
Let me ask this question. I don't want to sound conspiratorial. This thing where, as an example, they have contaminated the farmland and the food and with fertilizers, with heavy metals and so on. And then they turn around because of that situation. There's more pests. And then they come up with these pesticides like glyphosate, like you had mentioned. It's pervasive in our environment. It is everywhere. There's really no way of avoiding it. Is this something, Sophia, that you think is a centralized plan, or do you think that it's more like an evolution of stupidity? In other words, just not thinking about putting heavy metals into fertilizer, which was then going to go into the food, which was then going to increase the number of pests, then requiring pesticides and so on. I mean, what do you think it is? You think it's, like I said, stupidity, or is somebody sitting in a smoke-filled room, deciding how it is that they're going to make humanity more sick?
Mike, I'm going to give you the weirdest answer in the world, and you would have never expected it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm reading from AIDS, Opium, Diamonds, and Empire, Nancy Banks' extraordinary book. And on page 336, she's actually describing the theory of Lynn Margulis. She was the wife of Carl Sagan. She was an evolutionary biologist. I actually had the opportunity to have a phone call with Lynn Margulis once. So anyway, she's dead now. Nancy Banks writes that Margulis states, life did not take over the globe by combat, but by networking. Life forms multiplied and complexified by co-opting others, not just by killing them. This has been borne out, now this is Banks talking in her book, by cloning research that has shown that the structure of genes and genomes are both subject to small and large changes in the course of normal development and in response to feedback from the environment. The forms, meaning the life forms that survived, did so because of symbiosis, the relationship that develops between two different species of organisms that become interdependent in response to an environmental crisis, with each gaining benefits from the other. It's called symbiotic consortium, the combination of different species, right?
Hmm.
Now, Mike, we are being led into more and more technological invasion. And we are being forced to or being observed as we attempt to adapt to it. Now, this idea of artificial intelligence and man integrating with it, this is the whole, Ray Kurzweil, the
transhumanism.
Singularity.
Yeah.
It is a networking. That's what it really is. We have already networked many times. You and I have networked with these symbionts, these other life forms, and they live in our gut, they live in our bodies, they heal our tissues. They are our mitochondria. That's a different life form than what we are. So we have already incorporated, we have already networked, and it could be that this Earth experiment is going to continue in just that way. We are going to be networking with artifice now because this is the next phase.
So are you saying that, let me just make sure I understand what your point is here. Are you saying that to a large degree it is being orchestrated?
It doesn't surprise me. And the reason it doesn't surprise me is because human beings they seem to be going along with this.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. I think that maybe perhaps in the beginning it was a lot of stupidity that basically maybe got the ball in motion. But then the controllers or the people who are actually orchestrating were seeing how things were rolling out, and then it became opportunists.
Let me add to that point, because I was quite surprised when I heard Dr. Bush say this, and I was trying to figure out why. So what is irritable bowel? IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. I mean, there are people who can't eat beans. There are people who can't eat gluten. There are people who can't eat, my God, all these, I'm allergic to strawberries. I'm blah, 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 blah. I can't have peanuts, fish. These are autoimmune issues. And autoimmune issues, we know, occur because of failure in the tight junctions and the antibodies, as I've explained, being over-triggered in production, the white blood cells, the blood supply waiting on the other side of the gut wall, right?
Right.
So we have apparently among us got a wide range of irritability going with and against natural foods, right? And Bush said that the sickest people he has treated appear to be only able to tolerate processed foods. You would think this wouldn't be the case, but I've seen this where people who eat Wonder Bread, peanut butter, and Velveeta, and they eat the standard American chalky, crappy diet. I mean chalky because it produces stools that a friend of mine said are like paste. These people don't have any problems when they eat that food, but give them some spinach or some Brussels sprouts and they're going to go have gas and bloating and all this. So I haven't figured this one out yet.
Okay, so talk about IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. I know somebody in the family that was struggling with it. This may or may not be related to what we're talking about. I mean, it is. But I had done research, and Splenda was found to be a culprit. And I had gone to this person and I had said, look, you need to take Splenda. I think that's sucralose, I think. I'm trying to remember the generic name or the compound name for it. And they stopped using Splenda. They were using it, and it was actually in the foods. So they weren't necessarily taking a package of Splenda and putting it in coffee, as an example. It was in the food products in the supermarket. As soon as they stopped taking it, within a few days, the IBS symptoms and the problems went away. Just a little FYI for the audience. But your point is that there are people that are completely acclimated to the processed foods, and if you try to take them off it, as an example, give them some organic food, they don't do so well. Is that what you were saying?
I don't know why, Mike. I mean, that's what I'm saying, but that doesn't mean that's a proper diet for these people. I mean, they're going to end up with tremendous problems down the road. And people are accepting these problems. These are degenerative diseases, meaning that they are failures of different systems and tissues and organs in the body. And I want to give you the example that Dr. Bush gives in his interviews. And anyone who wants to listen to some really good interviews with Dr. Bush can go to my blog, sofiasmallstorm.com. You have to scroll down a little bit now, but every interview has the word Dr. Bush or Zachary Bush in it.
I'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, start with the Mercola interview. Now, Dr. Bush did not discuss Restore in his interview with Dr. Mercola, but he discussed this whole soil and gut biome. Very, very interesting show. And at that point, I was scared. I thought, oh no, now we're in really bad shape since we can't even eat the foods that I like to eat and expect they're going to do that much for us because they're not transferring enough of bacterial spectrum into us. So I hunted around the internet for more interviews, and I happened to just listen to them in a perfect order, and I've posted them in that order. The second interview I listened to was one that did mention Restore. I got very excited. It was with Dr. Pompa, Daniel Pompa. And if you just scroll up from the Mercola interview on my blog, you'll find that one. And then I posted one that he did with Moms Across America. Now, it's very helpful to children with autism, Restore. And I posted another one with Jeffrey Smith, the very famous Seeds of Deception author, and he's very big against glyphosate and Monsanto. That was a more technical interview, very intelligent interview and helpful. And I have now gone on to listen to webinars that Dr. Bush has done with practitioners that are extremely technical, and I am taking notes and trying to really grasp what's going on here. Dr. Bush talks about a pancreatic cancer patient that he had who was very, very low in weight. She had had pancreatic cancer for a while. She was pretty much unable to eat, and she was 59 pounds, okay, emaciated. And she hadn't had a proper bowel movement in, I think, like 2 years. She had been pooping out what they call white chalk stool. And it looks like sticks of white chalk. It's not a brown organic stool at all. The lining of your epithelium, it's shedding of dead epithelial cells. That's how sick she was. And she took Restore. She was one of his early people to try Restore. He did not tell her what he was hoping it would do. He didn't want to get her hopes up. And she called him within a few days, and she was starting to have proper, dark, organic stools.
And you yourself, you're taking it now?
Yeah, and I have a number of friends taking it. I wanted to try it before I put it in my store, and I'll describe it. So Restore looks like weak Lipton tea, and it has almost no taste. It's a light brown liquid. And you're supposed to take optimally a tablespoon a day. You can split that into a teaspoon before each meal. And the sicker you are, the more he recommends that you start out very conservatively. So if you are extremely challenged, like if you have heavy irritable bowel or a lot of autoimmune disorders or whatever, just start with a few drops, a quarter teaspoon. So I have friends with varying degrees of afflictions, and some are starting out very, very light. And I started with a half teaspoon twice a day. And other people I know are taking a teaspoon before each meal, and we've all noticed extremely good mood elevation. It's great because for the first few days you are so happy and you're sleeping really well. And you have lots of energy. The energy improvement is quite remarkable in those early days. Then people tend to notice a little bit of crankiness, constipation, but it doesn't last long. It lasts a couple of days for most of us. And then it goes to a better feeling. And I, for instance, had a mild headache for quite a while. I would say it was an ongoing issue. but very mild. I wouldn't notice it during the day. I would often notice it at night when I was trying to fall asleep, and I'd go, God, there it is. There, I have a little bit of headache. What is that? Restore has taken that away. I also had a drippy right sinus that was really bad on heavy chemtrail days. Restore has started to fix that.
Interesting. And you said it improved your sleep patterns.
Yeah, very deep sleep. I ground every night anyway, and someday we'll do a show on grounding, and I will explain what I have to ground with, which is very effective. The depth of sleep between Restore and grounding is almost indescribable. I almost feel guilty that I am sleeping so well.
Well, I know friends and family that are having sleep issues. Can't get to sleep, and when they finally do go to sleep, the sleep is very choppy, and because of that, they wake up in the morning, they're very tired. So I'm listening very, very intently here, Sofia, to all of this, and I have probably 3 or 4 people off the top of my head that I know that I need to have a discussion with. And what I'll do is I'm going to get this show out right away. I'll just send them the link, and I'm going to say, you're not sleeping, right? So listen to the show and see if this might be of interest to you, and maybe this product Restore can help you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to eventually try to write a flyer on it, but there are some good blurbs on the flyer that comes with Restore. And this is sophisticated stuff, and they have put a wording to it that it doesn't exactly break down what's happening, but it encapsulates what's happening. So, tight junctions, I'm reading from the flyer, are the special protein strands that lace cells together into a continuous membrane, creating an intelligent barrier, a firewall that extends from the sinus cavity to the colon. Now, what confused me, Mike, was this term tight junctions being used to describe actual proteins. And that's what Bush says, but I had to figure it out in my mind. Proteins are structural and transfer components in the body. So the spaces between cells may in fact be governed by strands of proteins that are called tight junctions, just the way the spaces are also called tight junctions, because proteins control structure. They are structural components in the body. So these tight junctions between the cells that lace the cells together in the membrane that holds the gut bacteria in you. Because you see, the body doesn't want stuff all over the place. Things belong in certain places, just as the cell membranes keep a certain content of materials within the cell and then other things not within the cell. So our cell membranes are semi-permeable, and the permeability varies based on what is supposed to go in and get out. So what a lot of, for instance, Wi-Fi does, wireless radiation, jolts and crashes those cell membranes, as do statin drugs. They poke cholesterol, which is a repair agent, out of cell membranes. The body uses cholesterol to patch up cell membranes, and the statin drugs, they poke that cholesterol out. So when you have failing cell membranes, your body's not functioning intelligently anymore on the biological level. Too much mixing and mushing is going on, and that's what makes you sick. So this firewall in the gut, controlled by tight junctions, is very, very important, because here it says leaks in this barrier can overwhelm the immune system. Did you know that 70% of the immune system is on the other side of the gut wall? Well, that's the white blood cells in the blood vessels. With Restore supporting the gut membrane, our immune system can recuperate instead of react. Bacteria communicate the same way your cells do, through moving patterns of charges. These are electrical charges called redox signaling. This is deep biochemistry, but they don't go into it. Think of Restore as a liquid circuit board that allows signals to flow through those carbon snowflakes, those carbon molecules, in graceful patterns of balance, extracted from pristine ancient soils and tested for purity and efficacy. Restore completes the code to make your body a healing machine.
Very, very interesting, Sofia. This has been really a great discussion, and I have been on the receiving end. And let me just let the audience know, I didn't have a lengthy discussion with Sofia about this before the show. We talked a little bit. So I'm receiving this as most of the folks who are listening are receiving this and just taking it all in. This is a product that you sell at your store, right? AvatarProducts.com?
I have started to sell it, and I'll tell people a little more about the sizes and also about the longevity of Restore, because this is very interesting, if you don't mind extending the show just a tiny bit.
No, go ahead.
So Restore comes in different sizes, but I chose to carry the 16-ounce size, which lasts at the recommended 1 tablespoon dose. It lasts you a month. And the 32-ounce size I also carry, the 1 quart. That will last you 2 months. But if you're taking less, it'll last you longer, obviously. So you have to find your dose, your proper dose. If you accelerate too much and run headlong into a tablespoon of Restore and you have too many issues, you might have some detox symptoms, because that's really what the healing is. It's a detoxification going on in your body. I recommend starting very conservatively, as people should with iodine as well, and to see what is a good fit for your body. I mean, you got nothing to lose by going slow. You haven't had it for all these years to start with, right? The 1 month supply is $50. 16 ounce is $50. And the 2 month supply is $70. I send little gifts. You will get a free tube of my special, absolutely smashing magnesium cream or something else in the bag, so that you can try something else from the store. So that's my gift to people who buy Restore. I want them to be able to try something else, which you're not going to get from Amazon or any other seller of Restore. And I say to people, hey, since I took all this trouble to learn it and explain it, it would be nice if you came to my store to get it, and you're going to get something else as well. One of the questions people ask is, all right, so if I take it and I like the effects, what do I have to do? Well, you have to keep taking it. There's an auto ship program at restoreforlife.com, which is the website of Dr. Bush, and they give you a break on auto ship. But when you're on auto ship, you basically have to be taking it with the regularity that's recommended. Because otherwise it'll just pile up, right? And you have to go off auto ship or give it to friends or something. So they will soon have a program for people like me who've turned newcomers onto Restore. And if those newcomers want auto ship and they want to stay loyal, there will be an affiliate program, but it's not done yet. The other question is, should you take more than the 1 tablespoon? And Dr. Bush has said it doesn't do you much good. You can chug Restore, and the extra, if you take 2 tablespoons a day, you're not going to notice anything beyond what the 1 tablespoon would give you. And this is clinically tested. They've used this on a lot of different people in medical settings. And Dr. Bush is not in love with allopathic medicine any longer, it seems. He seems to have woken up. He seems to have taken a right turn and gone in a whole other direction. So don't poo-poo the fact that he is triple board certified. I mean, this guy, when you listen to interviews with him, you know he is the real deal. He is triple board certified in internal medicine, palliative care, which some people refer to as hospice care, and endocrinology. So he's got the background to be working with a product like this. And then the third thing to mention is what I learned from a recent interview I listened to about stopping Restore. He said that you can stop taking Restore and your symptoms will flare again. The idea is to stay on Restore, which of course some people say, oh, well, that's great. That makes them a lot of money. But the idea is also, do you want to regain quality of life, which I think many of us do. So Dr. Bush suggests that because Restore is bringing the complement of carbon molecules into our bodies, which do that very important signaling to our mitochondria, that redox signaling, the liquid circuit board is back in our bodies with Restore. But what we still lack is the multiplicity of gut species, bacterial species. So he says, build your gut biome. Go to different terrains. Go to a meadow and breathe. Go to the forest and breathe. Go to the ocean and breathe. Go to the mountains and breathe. Inhale bacteria from different kinds of land, different parts of the earth, we call them chains, trophic chains. You want to inhale the detritivores and the decomposers from all the different regions that you can get to. You want to build your gut biome. And he says that if you can get your gut biome back up to 20,000 or 30,000 species, you can totally do without Restore, because that variation of bacteria are going to put all those different carbon snowflakes into your system that are going to talk to all your different cells, all the different kinds of cells you have in all the different organs. And that's ideally how you want to be. But today, we cannot get that complement. So the longer you take Restore, I heard him say, you will be okay for a longer period of time that you're not on it. So let's say you've taken it a year or so, you might get away with 2 or 3 weeks of not being on it. But if you have symptoms, those symptoms tend to come back. So the shorter time period you're on Restore, the quicker your symptoms will come back. The longer you're on it, the more you can be off it. But eventually you'll go back to where you were because your tight junctions will fail again.
Yeah. So, and the thing about making money, because you've got to be on it and stay on it. Well, being sick, works the same way. I mean, if you're going to walk around being sick and having to go to doctors and getting prescriptions and so on, and like you said, just a quality of life issue, well, there's a price for that also. So, if this is going to clear up ailments and maybe even autoimmune issues that people have and so on, Sophia, then it's, in my view, my opinion, we're not giving medical advice here, is I think it's well worth taking a look at. I know I'm going to.
Mike, yesterday I talked to a friend. He's very organic. He lives pretty much in a very, almost like a jungle-like area. And he had looked into Restore and he didn't think he really needed it. He ordered some. And he is so conscious of wireless radiation. There was a time, Mike, when I thought, oh, I'm vegetarian, vegan, I exercise. I don't have to worry about something like cancer. But today, with the forms of destruction around me that I really don't have any control over, like wireless radiation, every time I go downtown, I'm surrounded by towers, right? My house is clean, but if I visit someone's house or go to a restaurant, I'm bombarded with Wi-Fi, and I can actually feel it in my body. And it's the glyphosate, it's all kinds of issues that we are faced with that we don't really have control over. And if it's true that Restore promotes apoptosis in the cells, meaning it tells cells when to die because they can't be cancerous, then Restore is an anti-cancer agent. It's an anti-aging agent. Aging is loss of mitochondria. You lose 1% of your mitochondria every year. So old people look all papery and parchment-like, and they're bent over, and their bones are thinning, and all that stuff, because their mitochondria in their cells that govern their ATP production are dying. So Restore is restorative. I think that's why they called it this. And you are going to get less aging. You're going to get better protection against cancer. You're going to get a lot of repairs on the cellular level. It has an intelligent effect in your body. And I can't explain that more. He says it gives a differential response to healthy cells and sick cells like cancer cells. So it will upregulate reactive oxygen species, which are free radicals in certain kinds of cells, and it will downregulate in other cells. So this is the intelligence that no lab can figure out. You couldn't create this. You had to actually go, as he did, and match an intelligent Earth from eons ago to an unintelligent biological condition today. That's the brilliance of it.
I did go to Dr. Bush's website, and I took a look at some of the information he had there. It was impressive.
Mike, I want to add one more thing, because remember how I talked in the show on biological darkness about how much we need the sun, that the sun kicks off vitamin D production in our bodies, which is a hormone, and that vitamin D affects 3,000 genes, and all kinds of biological functions. It's the launching pad for biological functions that are necessary to optimal health. And in biological darkness, if you sit in an office or if it's constantly chemtrail sky every day and you don't get direct sunlight and you get filtered sun in terms of frequencies that are more akin to promoting degeneration, the activity of decomposers and detritivores, you will not flourish. So we need the sun. And in understanding and learning about the gut biome, it hit me that we need the earth too. And this is the interconnection. This is the networking. We are a very intelligent organism, supposedly, technically, theoretically. We need the sun and the earth in order to thrive. And that to me is pretty magical.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's funny you should mention that because earlier in the show I wrote down soil and how we are really dependent on it, but we don't know it because we're taught and acclimated toward dirt is dirt. It's dirt. There's nothing magical about it. It's dirt. In fact, things that are dirty we consider to be, ugh. But like you said, Sophia, it's all interconnected. It's all interconnected. And the more we reconnect back into the sun, back into the earth, and so on, the healthier we're going to be because all of these things, as you've just mentioned, they're being taken out of the equation. When we did the show on the sepsis agenda, it was all about the fact that they're taking the sunlight away and they're creating a septic environment for us. And, what they've done to the soil and to farming based on everything you've explained to us in this show, they've done the exact same thing with our food and with the land, So, like I said, we have to reconnect. We have to reconnect back to Mother Earth and get ourselves back to where we're supposed to be naturally.
Yeah, I always ruin your beautiful endings because I've forgotten something. There's also a sinus spray. You can blow it up your nose and it helps with allergies. And you can also put Restore on a wipe and you can smear it on skin conditions and watch what happens to those. So I think there are a lot of applications for this thing. And I am so grateful to Dr. Bush for making it and the other people that he worked with, William Vitalis. I maybe will be able to connect with some of these people one day, but I think as you do, Mike, that it's well worth some exploration on the part of listeners, and you're welcome to get it from my site, avatarproducts.com. All I can say is give it a shot. You don't have much to lose, right?
Exactly. Well, Sophia, as always, a great, great show. It's always a treat to have you on because the information that you bring forth is just so well researched. You articulate so well, and it's just very, very interesting information. So I'm glad that my hard drive got fixed and I was ready to get back and reconnect with you so that we can do this show and we'll be doing others in the future for sure. So, and as you know, as I always say, you are welcome back anytime. Anytime you want to talk about something, whatever it may be, just let me know and we'll get it out to the audience.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And thank you to all the listeners for bearing with us for such a long time.
Thank you, Sophia, so much. And that concludes another Sage of Quay interview, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Links to my guests' websites and social media are listed in the show notes below. And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for listening and visiting the blog. You can get to the blog by typing in sageofquayradio.blogspot.com or simply head over to our hub website at sageofquay.com. Also, if you get a moment, please visit laboroflovemusic.com to listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.
I'm packing my bags, and I'm out of here. Riches to rags, can't live in fear. This place is surreal. Nobody cares. Please go away. I won't behave. I don't care what you say. I don't sleepwalk or crawl on my knees. And I don't sheep talk, so you can be pleased. I'm tired of all the hate. I'm tired of all the dysfunction. I'm tired of being tired. I'm leaving dystopia. I'm packing my bags, and I'm out of here. Bitches to rags, can't live in fear. This place is surreal.